They told me I had no authority to challenge the restructure. The shareholder proxy form on my desk said otherwise. I'd been stripped of my project lead title 3 weeks earlier. No warning, no cause. My contracts manager, Bridget Hayes, pulled me into a conference room in Brisbane and informed me the consulting division was realigning priorities. My role was being eliminated. My projects were being redistributed. I had 30 days to transition my work and vacate my contractor position. I asked what I'd done wrong. She said nothing was wrong. It was structural. I asked to see the restructure plan. She said contractors weren't entitled to operational documentation. I asked if I could appeal. She smiled. To who? The executive who'd hired me, Marcus Chen, had left the company 2 months prior. The interim VP didn't know my name. HR told me contractor disputes weren't covered under internal review processes. I had no manager to escalate to. No protection, no recourse. They assumed I'd pack my things and disappear. They didn't know I'd been buying shares for 18 months. Disclaimer: all characters, companies, and events are fictional. Any resemblance to real people or companies is coincidental. The company had gone public 14 months before I was hired. The stock price was modest. Employees and contractors could buy shares through a managed fund with no restrictions. Most people ignored the option. I'd set up automatic purchases from every paycheck. Small amounts, consistent, unremarkable. By the time I was terminated, I owned 0.4% of the company. That doesn't sound like much, but the company had 43,000 issued shares. I held 172. Under Australian corporate law, any shareholder holding more than 0.1% has the right to requisition board-level documentation. They have the right to request extraordinary general meetings. They have the right to submit resolutions for board review. I was a contractor with no authority. I was also a shareholder with statutory rights. I didn't tell anyone. I spent the first week in silence. I responded to emails. I attended handover meetings. I transferred my files to the analysts who were absorbing my workload. I answered questions. I documented every instruction I received. I stayed late when asked. I smiled when greeted. I never once asked why. The contracts manager avoided me. She didn't return my calendar invites. She didn't reply to my questions about final payment terms. When I passed her in the corridor, she looked at her phone. The interim VP, a man named Paul Devorin, sent a company-wide email about streamlining our consulting vertical. My name wasn't mentioned. My projects weren't mentioned. The restructure was described as a strategic evolution. No one questioned it. I watched the team absorb my departure as a minor operational adjustment. My desk was reassigned on day 9. My access to the shared drive was revoked on day 12. My project code was removed from the internal tracker on day 15. I said nothing. I kept buying shares. Segment 2. On day 18, I received the formal termination notice. It was 3 paragraphs. No cause listed. No performance issues cited. The language was clean. Due to organizational restructuring, your contractor engagement will conclude effective March 31st. They offered 2 weeks severance pay as a goodwill gesture. Standard contractor terms didn't require any severance. They were being generous. I signed the acknowledgement form. I didn't negotiate. I didn't complain. I requested a copy of my personnel file as permitted under privacy legislation. HR sent it within 5 business days. It contained my original contract, my project assignments, and performance reviews. Every review was rated exceeds expectations. There were no disciplinary records, no warnings, no complaints. I saved everything. During my final 2 weeks, I began reviewing the shareholder portal. The company's constitution was publicly available. I read it 3 times. Section 9.4 outlined the process for shareholder requisitions. Any shareholder holding 0.1% or more could request access to board minutes, financial reports, and operational briefings. Requests had to be submitted in writing to the company secretary with a valid shareholder reference number. I had both. Section 12.2 outlined extraordinary general meeting protocols. Any shareholder holding 0.2% or more could requisition a meeting if they could demonstrate material concern about governance, compliance, or fiduciary duty. I held double that threshold. I didn't submit anything yet. I waited. My last day was a Friday. No farewell lunch, no card. The office manager sent a group email thanking me for my contributions. It was 2 sentences long. I packed my laptop. I returned my access card. I walked out at 4:30. No one said goodbye. I drove home and opened my shareholder account. I reviewed my holdings. I confirmed my ownership percentage. I drafted a formal requisition letter to the company's secretary requesting copies of all board minutes from the previous 6 months, all executive compensation reports, and all restructuring plans filed with the board between January and March. I cited Section 9.4 of the company constitution. I included my shareholder reference number. I sent it on Monday morning. The company secretary responded within 48 hours. Her name was Denise Corman. Her email was polite and procedural. She acknowledged my requisition as valid under the Constitution. She confirmed my shareholder status. She stated that the requested materials would be provided within 15 business days as required by the Corporations Act. No resistance, no questions, just compliance. I waited. The documents arrived on day 14. They were sent via encrypted email in PDF format. 463 pages total. I read every page. The board minutes showed 3 restructuring proposals submitted between January and March. 2 were approved. 1 was deferred. The approved proposals outlined budget reductions in the consulting division. Specific contractor roles were identified as redundant. My role was listed in Appendix C under non-essential project leads. The decision was dated February 11th. I was terminated on March 4th. The delay was interesting. The executive compensation report showed that Paul Daverin, the interim VP, received a performance bonus of $48,000 in late February. The bonus was tied to cost reduction targets in the consulting division. He was paid for cutting my role. That was standard corporate practice. Not illegal, not unusual. But the restructuring plan contained something else. Page 207 outlined the reallocation of my projects. My contracts were being redistributed to 3 analysts and 1 external consultant. The external consultant was a boutique firm called Meridian Strategy Group. I searched for Meridian Strategy Group in the corporate registry. The sole director was listed as Catherine Daverin, Paul Daverin's wife. I read the section again. The board minutes showed that the Meridian contract was approved on February 18th. The contract value was $112,000 over 6 months. My annual contractor rate had been $96,000. They'd terminated me and replaced me with a more expensive contractor, owned by the executive's spouse. I checked the company's conflict of interest policy. It was outlined in the governance charter. Section 4.7 required executives to disclose any financial relationships with vendors, contractors, or service providers where a family member held a material interest. Paul Daverin had signed the charter when he was appointed interim VP. I searched the board minutes for any disclosure related to Meridian Strategy Group. There was none. I printed the relevant pages. I highlighted the dates. I cross-referenced the contract value against my termination timeline. I reviewed the conflict of interest policy again. Then I did nothing. I didn't file a complaint. I didn't contact the board. I didn't reach out to HR. I waited. 3 weeks passed. I applied for unemployment benefits. I updated my resume. I attended 2 job interviews. I checked my shareholder account daily. The stock price remained stable. My ownership percentage held at 0.4%. I received my final paycheck on April 15th. It included the 2-week severance. The amount was correct. No deductions, no errors. I deposited the check. I bought more shares. On April 22nd, I submitted a second requisition to the company secretary. I requested all vendor contracts approved by the board between January and April. I requested all conflict of interest disclosures filed by executives during the same period. I requested copies of the governance charter acknowledgments signed by Paul Daverin upon his appointment as interim VP. I cited Section 9.4 again. Denise Corman responded within 24 hours. Same tone, same compliance. She confirmed the request and stated the materials would be provided within 15 business days. I waited. The documents arrived on May 7th, 318 pages. The vendor contracts included Meridian Strategy Group. The contract scope outlined project deliverables that matched my previous responsibilities almost word for word. The contract was signed by Paul Daverin on February 20th. The conflict of interest disclosure log showed 12 entries from various executives. None were from Paul Daverin. The governance charter acknowledgement showed Paul Daverin's signature dated January 9th. He'd agreed to comply with all disclosure requirements outlined in Section 4.7. He'd violated his own signed commitment. I compiled everything into a single folder. I organized the documents chronologically. I created a summary sheet outlining the key dates, contract values, and policy violations. I kept my language neutral. No accusations, no emotional commentary. Just facts. Then I reviewed Section 12.2 of the company constitution again. Extraordinary general meetings could be requisitioned by shareholders holding 0.2% or more if they could demonstrate material concern about governance, compliance, or fiduciary duty. I held 0.4%. A governance violation by an executive who personally profited from terminating a contractor and awarding the contract to his spouse without disclosure qualified as a fiduciary concern. I drafted a requisition letter. I stated that I was exercising my rights under Section 12.2 to request an extraordinary general meeting to review potential governance violations related to vendor contract approvals and conflict of interest disclosure compliance. I attached my summary sheet. I attached copies of the board minutes, the Meridian contract, the disclosure log, and the governance charter acknowledgement. I sent it to the company secretary on May 10th. Denise Corman's response took 4 days. Her tone had changed. She acknowledged my requisition as procedurally valid. She confirmed my shareholder status. She stated that the request would be forwarded to the board chair for review. She noted that under the Constitution, the board had 30 days to either schedule the meeting or provide a written explanation for declining the request. She asked if I was represented by legal counsel. I wasn't. I didn't need to be. I replied that I was acting as an individual shareholder exercising statutory rights. I stated that I did not require legal representation at this stage. I thanked her for her assistance. I waited. On May 18th, I received an email from the board chair. His name was Graham Howell. He was a non-executive director with a background in corporate governance. His email was formal, but not hostile. He acknowledged my requisition. He stated that the board took all shareholder concerns seriously. He noted that the matters I'd raised required internal review before any meeting could be scheduled. He asked if I would be willing to meet with him and the company's legal counsel to discuss the concerns in detail before proceeding with a formal extraordinary general meeting. He suggested that an informal resolution might be more efficient. I read the email 3 times. He wasn't dismissing me. He wasn't threatening me. He was offering a procedural off-ramp. I considered my options. I could refuse and demand the meeting. That was my legal right. But the board could delay, request clarifications, or argue that the concerns were already being addressed through internal processes. Or I could meet with him, hear their position, assess their response. I replied that I was willing to meet. I stated that I expected the meeting to occur within 10 business days. I requested that Denise Corman attend as a neutral administrative witness. Graham Howell agreed. The meeting was scheduled for May 28th. The meeting was held in the conference room at the company's Brisbane office. I arrived 15 minutes early. Graham Howell was already there. So was the company's legal counsel, a woman named Marian Fletcher. Denise Corman sat at the far end of the table with a laptop open. No one else attended. Paul Devoren was not present. Graham Howell introduced himself. He was in his early 60s. Calm demeanor. No visible tension. He thanked me for attending. He stated that the purpose of the meeting was to understand my concerns and explore whether they could be addressed without requiring a formal, extraordinary general meeting. I said that was acceptable. Marian Fletcher opened a folder. She had copies of all the documents I'd submitted. She asked me to walk through my concerns in my own words. I did. I explained that I'd been terminated as part of a restructuring plan approved by the board in February. I explained that my role had been classified as non-essential. I explained that my contracts had been transferred to an external vendor called Meridian Strategy Group. I explained that the vendor was owned by Catherine Devoren, the spouse of Paul Devoren, who had approved the contract and received a performance bonus for cost reductions in the same period. I explained that Paul Devoren had not disclosed the conflict of interest, despite signing the governance charter acknowledgement requiring such disclosure. I stated that I was not alleging fraud or intentional misconduct. I was raising a governance concern about policy compliance and fiduciary oversight. I kept my tone flat, professional, factual. Graham Howell listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded. He said the board had not been aware of the family relationship between Paul Devoren and the Meridian vendor. He said the conflict of interest disclosure process relied on self-reporting by executives. He said it appeared that process had failed in this instance. He asked if I had experienced any retaliation or improper treatment during my termination. I said no. The termination process had been procedurally correct. I had no complaints about how I was treated. He asked what outcome I was seeking. I said I wanted confirmation that the board would review the vendor contract approval process and enforce the conflict of interest policy consistently. He asked if I was seeking reinstatement or financial compensation. I said no. Marian Fletcher made notes. She asked if I was planning to pursue legal action against the company. I said I was not. She asked if I would withdraw my requisition for an extraordinary general meeting if the board agreed to conduct an internal review of the matter. I said I would consider it, depending on the scope and timeline of the review. Graham Howell leaned back. He said the board would meet within 7 days to discuss the matter. He said they would provide a written response outlining their proposed course of action. He said if I found the response acceptable, the extraordinary meeting would not be necessary. I agreed to wait for their response. The meeting ended after 38 minutes. The board's response arrived on June 3rd. It was a 3-page letter signed by Graham Howell. The board had conducted an expedited review of the Meridian Strategy Group contract. They had confirmed that Paul Devoren had failed to disclose the conflict of interest, as required by the governance charter. They had determined that the failure constituted a policy violation. Paul Devoren had been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. The Meridian contract had been suspended. The board had appointed an external auditor to review all vendor contracts approved by Paul Devoren during his tenure as interim VP. The audit would be completed within 60 days. The board had also revised the conflict of interest disclosure process to include mandatory third-party verification for all executive vendor approvals. Graham Howell stated that the board appreciated my diligence in bringing the matter to their attention. He stated that shareholder oversight was essential to maintaining governance standards. He asked if I considered the matter resolved. I did. I sent a reply confirming that I would not proceed with the extraordinary general meeting requisition. I thanked him for the board's prompt attention to the issue. I kept my tone courteous, professional. I didn't mention that I was still holding my shares. 3 weeks later, Paul Devorin resigned. The announcement was brief. The board thanked him for his service and noted that he was pursuing other opportunities. No mention of the investigation, no mention of the policy violation. That was expected. Companies rarely publicize internal disciplinary matters. The interim VP role was filled by someone from the finance division. The consulting restructure was quietly reversed. 2 of my former projects were reassigned to internal staff. The rest were shelved. No one contacted me. No one apologized. That was fine. I found a new position in July. Different company, different industry, better pay. I kept my shares. By September, the company's stock price had increased by 11%. My holdings were worth more than I'd paid for them. I considered selling. I didn't. In October, I received a notice about the annual general meeting. All shareholders were invited to attend. The agenda included standard items: financial reports, director elections, executive compensation. I attended. I sat in the back row. I didn't ask questions. I didn't raise my hand. I voted on every resolution using my proxy form. Graham Howell was re-elected as board chair. Marion Fletcher presented the governance update. She outlined the new conflict of interest verification process. She noted that the process had been implemented following a shareholder-initiated review earlier in the year. She didn't mention my name. She didn't need to. I left after the meeting ended. I didn't speak to anyone. I walked to my car and drove home. I still own the shares. They're worth $18,000 now. I didn't buy them for revenge. I bought them because I wanted authority.